Greetings Blender sculptors and welcome to another video. I've been busy away creating these skeletal characters, a warrior, then an archer, and I thought this clan could use one more, so let's focus on bringing the last one to life. We will need this guy to stay consistent with the style of the other two while also being unique in his own right. Let's get started. First of all, let's make a copy of all the objects on the skeletal warrior. The main thing we need to do first is select each of the objects and start to put this new character in a different pose. As you can see, many of these objects are parented together, so that as we rotate them, other objects will move at the same time. For example, if we move the arm, then the forearm and the hand will move at the same time. In order to understand this better, you can download the Armature Poser from my Gumroad. This is a great file to understand how the parenting works, and it's actually the file that I've used to create the skeletal warrior initially. One big thing I'm keeping in mind while creating this character is it needs to share many of the key elements from the other two characters. This is so that it will fit into the clan and look as though it's part of the same group of units. Of course, because we've made a copy of the skeletal warrior, we can keep many of the objects looking very similar. What we need to do is take some of the main elements, like the axe and the shield, and replace those with new things so that it follows this sort of spellcaster type. We're just going to convert that axe from the warrior into more of a staff-like shape. And I'm taking a sphere and stretching it out using the snake hook, and then I'm just using clay strips to sort of rough up the surface. You'll notice I'm using a lot of custom pie menus here. These are simply shortcuts to various sculpting tasks I use often during the workflow. You can download the add-on for free on the Gumroad too, if this could be helpful to you. I find them essential to keeping the workflow efficient while sculpting, as many of the shortcuts can be tricky to access manually. So one technique I'm using to create the surface texture of these characters, I wanted them to look a little bit more rough and dangerous. I have a tendency to create much more cuddly style characters, much more friendly characters. Just using the clay strips and sort of scratching along the surface and not really smoothing often is leaving this sort of nice rough texture, which I think suits these skeletons quite nicely. With the spine, you'll notice that it's controlled using a curve, and if you want to know a little bit more about creating repeating objects like this over a curve, you can check out my video about repeating patterns using curves. So my initial idea for the pose is sort of standing up straight and holding the staff aloft, perhaps having the other hand in a more casting type pose. However, I don't really think this is working for me, so it won't take us long to adjust the pose further and try and find something new that we like. So I'm starting to think about having the staff in the right hand now, and because I'm quite happy with the left hand pose with the clenched fist, I'm going to convert that over to the right hand side. So because all of the fingers are parented to the palm, I can select the palm and mirror it across the x-axis in this case, and it will mirror all of the child objects as well. And there's an add-on called Copy Attributes submenu that allows you to select two objects and copy the location quickly. So I'm starting to think about maybe having this caster as more of a shaman type character. So I'm starting to think about perhaps some sort of squatting type pose, keeping the staff but changing the style of it so that it's a bit more shaman-like. So I've made a copy of the forearm and the arm, and then I've used Ctrl J to join them together and remeshed into one object. And then using the mesh filter inflate, just expanding that mesh out, and then I'm able to use grab and snake hook, just using clay strips and just creating a sort of torn, rugged cloth-like pattern. Using Control Shift and drag, we can select different parts of the foot and then rotate the unmasked part to position the foot in more of a crouching pose. So I want to add a little bit of variation to each skull, and what I've done is turned off the symmetry and used clay strips and draw sharp to dig in and create a crack effect in the skull. Making a start on the staff now, and I've made a copy of the initial cylinder shape, and I'm just using grab and snake hook to push and pull the mesh inside and out, and I'm trying to create a twisting wood-like effect. What we will be doing soon is using Ctrl J and connecting these objects together and remeshing, and then we can build on it further using clay strips. So I'm making a copy of the skull, and we can shrink this down and use this as a feature for the staff. If we remesh the jaw and the skull and the jaw together. So now we've merged the staff wood together. Can start building this up to look a little bit more wood-like. I'm using draw sharp and clay strips. So as always, starting with quite a high resolution when remeshing, so we can get the primary forms in place first, and then we can start to look at more detail in a little bit. The hand's going to need adjusting slightly, maybe opening up a little more, because the thickness, the thickness of the staff is a bit thicker than the hand axe was for the warrior. We have to be careful that the fingers are overlapping the staff, because if we leave any holes or gaps, this will impact the 3D print. I'm just taking, I made like a diamond-like structure on the archer and put it into the bow. So, and I've taken that, made a copy of that to put into the skull. And this is another thing, having repeating objects like this is another thing that will contribute to making this caster look part of the clan. I'm using a couple of different hard surface brushes which are slightly customized, and I do have a video on hard surface sculpting which goes through the setup of these brushes and a bit more information, so check that out if you're interested. So I'm working a bit more on the cloth now, and I'm able to use clay strips and holding control to dig in and add in some little cuts and imperfections, and this helps give the cloth the look of being old and worn, and of course it being a skeleton, many of the objects he'll have won't be in the best condition, so this just helps contribute to the look of the character. Also using snake hook to pull out small parts of the cloth so that it can sort of make the cloth look more ragged. I've made a duplicate of that cloth and slewn it over his right shoulder. Once I've joined and remeshed this skull together that's on the staff, I've actually used the mesh filter inflate to sort of just bulk it out a little bit, and now I'm just going in with clay strips and I'm just redefining the shapes of this. I want it to look slightly different to the actual character's skull, and just make it look a little bit more symbolic as a skull that would be used on a staff for casting. Making a duplicate of that rock, and I'm using the standard brush to sort of push in, using Colding control and pushing in the geometry in each of the surfaces, and that's just making the rock look a little bit more interesting rather than it just being flat. And I think once it's printed, this will emphasize the rock / crystal shape a lot better. So I've made another duplicate of the cylinder that was in the center of the staff, just so we can add another finer strand to the wood. So now I've remeshed the staff at a much higher resolution now, so I'm going in with clay strips again, and I'm just defining some smaller shapes. So it's, in effect, it's like the wood grain I'm creating. making a copy of the thigh now, and it's similar to when I made a copy of the arm. I'm just adding some ragged clothes. So just using clay strips mainly, and pinching at the ends to sharpen those up. Trying to keep a similar style for the cloth on his body as well. So if you notice, as I'm scratching out the sort of cloth fold, you can see how I'm creating that pattern there by just sort of sketching over the surface with clay strips. It's just leaving quite a nice texture. I'm just taking a look at all three of them together and just seeing if they're sort of a similar size and they sort of look as though they're part of a group. I'm just adding the mirror modifier now to a sphere and pulling out some sort of horns or tree-like structure to just give the staff a little bit more interest. Now you'll notice while I'm sculpting on the mirrored object, the mirror isn't actually appearing while in sculpt mode. If you open up the N menu by pressing the N key, there is an option to turn off the mirrored topology while you're sculpting, because I find when you get into quite a detailed mesh that there's quite a bit of a performance. You lose quite a bit of performance while sculpting and it's mirrored at the same time. just using Control Shift and drag and selecting part of the jaw, and then I'm just doing a mass slice and fill holes and just adding a bit of variation to this face so that it looks quite different from the other two sculpts. So I've taken one of the eyes, these sort of crystal eyes, and made a duplicate and put it into the left hand. So it's sort of looking into it as though it's some sort of crystal ball, perhaps. I'm not sure. I'm using a planar brush to flatten out the faces. And again, if you check out the hard surface video, that explains how to customize your brush to work in that way. Making a copy of those mirrored horns and just making them smaller, putting them in position on the bigger horn shape, give it a little bit more detail. So going into solo mode with that cloth strip there, and by hitting the / key and then masking the underside of the cloth, and that's so that I can then flip the mask and pull in, using the move tool while in sculpt mode, pull in the geometry into the center of the character, and that means that when we're 3D printing later on, there won't be any holes in the middle. Taking a copy of one of the arrows embedded into the shield of the warrior, just so that I can add that into the staff, and that's just another element that will tie these characters together. Using draw sharp and holding control to reverse it, drawing along the edges of the cloth just sharpens up the shapes there and just defines them a little better. Add in a little bit more damage and scratches in as well to just give it a bit more of a distressed look. So similar to with the staff skull, I'm using just a standard brush and holding control and pushing in those flat surfaces just to keep a similar shape language to the staff there. So with the arrow there, in order to bend it at that point, what I needed to do was use Control-Shift-Drag and mask out part of the arrow, setting the pivot point to under the cursor, and then I was able to bend the mesh from the point where the mask finishes. I'm making some adjustments to the chest crystal now, and this area is shared throughout all 3 sculpts. So once I've made these changes to this crystal, if I select the others and use the command link object data, I can copy those changes across to the other objects. Once these characters were completed, I did need to make some small adjustments to the spine, arms and legs to just thicken them up slightly, as after the first test print, these came out a little on the thin side. One thing I should mention is when I'm creating the cracks in the skulls using clay strips and draw sharp, I'm also pinching the ends to tidy up the effect. And here's the finished skeletal caster. This completes the clan nicely, and I really enjoyed working on them. Hopefully you can take something away from this process when designing your own groups of units in the future. These skeletons are of course now available on the Gumroad to download. If you join up to my Patreon, you can get all of the miniatures on the store for free, while also supporting the creation of content just like this. Thanks to everyone who has supported me so far, and I will see you in the next one.